Joining me now to talk more about local government infrastructure needs and the role of the Public Works Board in making that a reality is Kelly Snyder, Public Works Director for Snohomish County, and Gary Rowe, who is a former, now retired, longtime county executive and county public works director up in Skagit and Jefferson counties, and also is now the vice chair of the Public Works Board. Thank you both for being here. Good to see you. And let's launch right in. This Public Works Board, we've got the sort of scene setter for the first half of the show of why it exists, what it does for communities, but you have been on the receiving end. You work in local government. Let me start with you. What is this source of funding? What does this board mean for communities like Snohomish County?
Well, thanks for having us here today. It really means a lot. This program, living as long as 40 years, is pretty incredible. And I think for local government, whether it's a county, a city, a special purpose district, we all see this as a vital source. We have to basket weave together fund sources to make a project go. Whether you're a small jurisdiction who might have a $5 million project, or let's say you're a large county with large projects that might cost over $100 million, these are the pieces of funding that are so vital. So we've had a road project that opened in the last couple of years. We went from 3 lanes to 5 lanes in a very urban corridor within Snohomish County. We were able to do curb, gutter, sidewalk, storm, drainage, and then we also removed some fish barriers that are so vital for making sure that our orcas can be safe within the Puget Sound. So the pieces and elements of these are vast. It's not just one little thing. It's oftentimes an integrated project.
And just to be clear, the Public Works Board funding that your county got for that project was a piece of the funding?
There's a piece of the funding, yes.
Because as you said, you're sort of putting it all together to get what you need.
The fund source is limited for the Public Works Board to $10 million. So for these kinds of projects that Snohomish County is looking at, we're looking at $20, $30 million projects. So it's a piece. Right. So we might
one leg of the stool.
One leg of the stool.
Okay. Gary, you have an interesting perspective because you worked in county government for many, many years, as I noted, and you are now the vice chair of this board. So you see both sides of it. You see what it's like to be a recipient and the need, but also now the ability to have some influence on how this program is operated. From where you sit, how are you thinking about, especially 40 years in and with huge infrastructure needs still unmet, the role of this board and its importance?
Well, as you mentioned, I was a young engineer when the board was first formed, and I had a project in the first year. Wow. It didn't seem like it was much at the time, but at the time we were experiencing a lot of inflation. And to be able to get a project funded in full rather than have it done in parts gave me the ability to get that project done completely at the time.
Was the key that you were getting a low interest
Very
loan?
much. It was at the time with inflation rates that were double digit, having a low interest loan was much easier than waiting another year and have a project cost that much more, or even maybe a few years, because we would have to put funding together over time. So that's an example of how using the borrowed money really helps move a project along. I live in Jefferson County, and I worked in Jefferson County, and the county has had several projects that were funded. One of the most recent one, I think, is a good example of how the Public Works Board has really helped the county. Probably about 10 years ago, I'd have to look at the exact time, the Jefferson County was able to leverage some dollars from the Public Works Board to be able to start developing a sewer system in the Port Hadlock area. This is a big lift for the community, because
this would be an area that was on septics, I presume, and
yes,
and you want to get them off septics, not have that running into Puget Sound and get them on.
So we were able to provide funding to do the initial early work, to be able to purchase property, to be able to do the planning and things like that. And they were able to leverage those early investments along with local county funds to be able to get funding through the state budget, through the capital budget, for some of the federal funding that came in the last couple of years, AGA funding or BIL fundings, and they've been able to leverage that
federal money,
right, for about a $40 million project to be able to, and they're in construction now, and with those dollars, they're going to be able to support and provide services to low income and some great projects that are underway that would not be being done in that area, which is a big help for the county.
So obviously this program has been super beneficial for communities, and it's kind of a lifeline, and it provides, whether it's a small project and you can get all the funding you need through it, or it's a kind of piecing together the pieces. But the reality is there is so much infrastructure need. There's deferred maintenance. There are systems that are on the verge of failure. We read headlines around the country of like entire cities that where their water system has imploded and isn't working anymore. So let's have a little reality check here about, like, you can point to the bright spots, but you're running a major county public works operation. What's the reality on the ground in terms of your needs and the funds that are available to meet them from all those sources?
Yeah, when I look at our transportation improvement program for the next 6 and 20 years, Snohomish County just adopted its new comprehensive plan. You know, we are thinking about what ways are we going to fund all of these projects, and it is a bit of a daunting task. You know, we see 30% inflation for construction, and we have had to make some hard choices about pushing out projects because we can only afford, we have to prioritize projects, and we can't afford all the things that we want to be able to do. So Public Works Board is a part of that. We have to think about Transportation Improvement Board. We also have to think about the legislature and those asks. We also worry about, this is a network. Transportation is a network for us. So, WashDOT needs its funding, county government needs its funding, cities need their funding. How do we basket weave all these projects together too? And we have Sound Transit coming to Snohomish County, and we need to make sure that we're ready for those things. So it's a daunting task, and I worry. It does cause me worry about how we're going to be able to deliver all of these things. And we're just looking at all the revenue sources right now and thinking about what's the future is going to look like.
I did your bio a disservice. I should also note you are a former executive director of the Public Works Board. You've worn many hats, but including that one. So, Gary, how would you answer that question? And we could layer in the fact that the president has just ordered tariffs on 2 of our key trading partners. We've obviously seen huge inflation in recent years. We've seen supply chain disruptions related to the COVID pandemic. And you've been in this business for decades. You see the need and the unmet need and all of the challenges. Give us a level set or a reality check.
Well, it's typical federal, whether it's whatever program the federal is, there's always potential for impacts, whatever happens with the federal budget. What we do at the local level is try to be able to be there for those communities that need it when they need it. And one of the great programs that the Public Works Board has is this emergency program. Our emergency program provides the ability to be able to be one of the first providers of any agencies that can provide funding to a community. When they had the fires in Malden community a few years ago, we were in there right away to be able to provide funding for rebuilding their water system. We've had communities that have near disasters. Fortunately, we've been able to provide funding within a few weeks to be able to head off flooding or other types of things like that. The talk about changes at the federal level for FEMA, for example, we don't know what that might mean, but at the same time, at the local level, we do feel like we have a program that really provides the ability to be able to meet the need at a moment's notice. In Eastern Washington, with the drawdown or the lowering of water tables, we've had several communities have lost their wells, and we've been able to come in there with funding to be able to replace those wells before the communities actually run out of water. So I think that's the great thing about the way we run the program. We are trying to be as flexible and responsive as possible, so those communities are able to get the funding they need when they need it.
But is it also fair to say that demand outstrips available funding?
Of course. Yeah, we have a limited amount of money. We have limits. For instance, we get an appropriation of $400 million. That sounds great, but only 20% of that money could be set aside for emergency or other pre-construction. So we're not an emergency agency by a long shot, but we're part of the overall response that the state has available to them to be able to do that. And so we feel like we can be responsive. We can be part of the solution.
I want to ask about sort of these two, it doesn't seem like these are necessarily core missions of the Public Works Board, but they are emerging issues, broadband and housing. Broadband is newer to the Public Works Board, and I understand that there's very little money available. There was quite a lot of demand for it. Of course, the federal infrastructure dollars is the BEAD program that's sending a lot of money into states for that. But, and this is probably not necessarily your bailiwick, but for either of you, is there a thought that this board and its funding should and could be sort of expanded to meet these sort of future needs, as opposed to just let's dig in the ground and replace the old sewer lines?
I can
Yeah.
try to answer that. A few years ago, I think it was 2019, that was when the broadband was initially established in statute for the Public Works Board to administer. And we were provided a small amount of money at the time. It was around $45 million. And we allocated it out really quickly and got those projects out the door. Since then, there's been federal dollars, as you mentioned, the information, I guess, IIJA funds. I'm not sure exactly what it was.
Yeah, the BEAD, the BEAD program, yeah.
That was the initial funding that provided us about somewhere around 80 or 40 million additional dollars, 80 million total for all of our program. And again, those dollars went out, but the new program that's on the horizon is the BEAD dollars that are coming, and those are being administered through the State Broadband Office and with collaboration from our office. But we know that once the broadband dollars are spent, those federal dollars, even though they're meant to be able to meet all the needs, there will still be a need that's there. So we're looking at what we call a post-BEAD strategy, and what do we do after those dollars are spent, and what are those dollars needs going to be, and we have the program in place to administer that at some point when that need is identified, and we can look at whether or not we'd be able to get the funding to be able to put that out. But I think it's important to point out that the dollars are making a huge difference right now. We see communities that have not, and I can speak again to my county, Jefferson County, where those dollars, whether it's the federal dollars or the state dollars, have made a significant difference, where the local PUD has started from essentially zero and are building an entire network for the community in Jefferson County, and will be a provider of broadband on into the future. So there's an example of a county that's going to really benefit from these dollars in the community.
And I think the part of why I brought up broadband is it's evidence of the fact that infrastructure needs evolve. Some things stay the same. You're going to have roads and bridges. You're going to have water and sewer lines. But then as technology changes, then we start to think about, for instance, broadband and fiber in the ground as another form of infrastructure that has to be put in, and then it also has to be maintained. So the other sort of, a big pressing issue in the state right now is housing, affordable housing, the number of units. I know it's not directly tied to this program, but as you all are thinking about infrastructure for the future, building for the future, is there a role, either as a county planner or as you think about a program like this, to be thinking about how can we help solve the housing crisis, even though that's not your direct line of responsibility?
So as a board, we had a board meeting on Friday and we talked about this a bit. And I think collectively, it's really important. Our role is making sure that if jurisdictions are in need, they can borrow at a low interest, which helps them keep their rates down. So that's the part, like it's about the housing, but it's also about living in the housing. And it's the total cost of that living. And so making sure that the funds are available to jurisdictions for their infrastructure keeps those infrastructure costs down. So affordable housing requires affordable infrastructure, and that's the role that we play right now. I think both of the questions that you're asking is about the nimbleness also of our program and our staff, who are fantastic. They have been able to stand up things over time, and then as money goes away, then we can close those down. And I think that's the flexibility of our program. So if the legislature says, hey, we have a new program for you, we will be able to figure out how to stand that up and figure out how to support the needs that come our way.
Yeah, so affordability for the communities, the low interest loans are key to that, obviously. But one thing, again, that you don't control is the cost of these projects, inflation, all of those other challenges. And so I do wonder, when you layer on, and I'll ask you this, Gary, you layer on the unmet need and the fact that that need always outstrips the available dollars, and then you add in all of these variables that you have no control over, where does that put us in terms of, or I guess maybe the way to ask the question is, are we going one step forward and two steps back at all times when it comes to our infrastructure? Or are you more optimistic about it?
I always tend to be an optimist. I think that we at the local level are very dependent on whether there's state funding or federal funding to provide meet the needs for infrastructure. I think that the board's direction and is to basically try to build things that are sustainable, and so that we're not having to immediately look at replacing them. Every local jurisdiction, whether it's for roads or whether it's for water or sewer, are always up against the battle of being able to maintain and sustain what they have. And that's what's important, is how do we do that over time. I think that if you did an exhaustive study, you'd find that there's always going to be billions of dollars in need out there and not enough money to be able to meet that need. But the example that we hear about is the PFAS that's out there. Here's something that wasn't thought of, what we didn't know about 10 years ago, but that need to address that issue is going to come up. And so some way we're going to be able to identify whatever kind of funding is necessary, whether it's federal funding, state funding, to be able to address that particular issue. And there'll be another issue that may come and replace PFAS at some point. So it's an evolving and continuing situation. I do want to bring up one point back to what Kelly said regarding the funding. I think that we do have grant funding and with the board, and when you're trying to keep rates lower, as you described, we do that very aggressively through low interest rates and grants. An example of that would be a project that might cost $4 million. If you went out on the open market with interest, it may cost over $5 million with loan repayment, but with grants and lower interest, especially for our severely distressed areas, we can get that payback on that project to be around $2 million. So that community can keep their rates lower and be able to afford that particular project.
I'm really glad you brought up PFAS, because we were talking about like new technologies, changing the definition of infrastructure, like with broadband, but then PFAS, chemicals in drinking water that are dangerous to the public health, that then have to be removed, and that's very costly. That's sort of these surprise issues that come up. And as you say, there might be something after PFAS. Right. So let me turn the kind of tables here a little bit and ask you, Kelly, about, well, okay, so local governments and local entities are very dependent on the state and feds for funding for infrastructure, as Gary just laid out. The flip side, though, is what obligation do local governments have to be, in essence, taxing or charging their communities for future needs, to sort of say, okay, we built this, we know it's not going to last forever, so we better be saving for the next time or for the rainy day. And I realize you're not the elected leader here, but how do you think about this as a public works official? Just what skin in the game does the local government or its community have here?
So in Snohomish County, I'm in charge of roads and garbage and recycling that goes with that. And I think about the equivalency of water and sewer for this conversation is the garbage. And there are rates that we charge, and it's sort of a user fee. So people come in and self-haul and drop it off at our transfer stations, and then we haul it into some sort of intermodal yard, and then onto a landfill and or recycle facility. And we have looked at making sure that we can maintain our rates, be able to provide all the operating services that we can, make sure that our capital investments are made. We've just finished our comprehensive plan update. We know that those needs are out there, and we have just run a rate study. So I think it's some of our obligation to look at those plans, identify the needs for rates, and then go to our leadership, elected officials, and say, here's what we're proposing, and then they can make that decision. And we bring to them the pros and cons of that, right? It is, we're very concerned about areas that are distressed, but it's also something that is a cost that must be used by those who are using the system. And so we're going to do that here soon, and we'll see what our electeds say.
Yeah. Do you have a thought about this, Gary, sort of the responsibility of the local governments to be making down payments on their future needs so they're not just dependent on state and federal funds?
Sure. I think that every community can be good about it, and some communities may need to do more work. It really kind of depends on what the resources and the capabilities of those communities. In many of the smaller communities, it's very tough for them to be able to come up with the amount of funds they need to be able to replace or sustain things over time. Most of the rate setting that we do is that they do. I don't do it. Excuse me, but they do. It goes through a public process. They have to be able to get those approved by their local, executive council or whatever their community is governed by. And, it's tough. We understand that. And I think that when we look at some of the smaller communities, we have to be able to figure out a way to be able to help them along that process. In many cases, we, through technical assistance, the board staff through technical assistance will help those communities through their rate setting processes and things like that to be able to come up with the resources they need to be able to pay back a loan or provide funding for a project. But it is a challenge. It can't be denied that all communities have the challenge of finding the resources necessary to keep their infrastructure up to date.
We have just a couple minutes left, so I'll give each an opportunity to sort of close us out. What do you want the public, what do you want legislators? They're in session now, thinking about in the context of infrastructure needs, local government, this particular program. What's your takeaway message?
Thank you so much for creating it. It is a program that continues to serve communities for the last 40 years. It's an essential piece of that. Our ask this year is $400 million. We look at our model, that's what we think that the funding can help support. It's just a drop in the bucket in infrastructure needs across this state. I hope that we get that support, and also to really support the extension of SYNC. SYNC has just been a valuable resource. I think it's an efficiency model within state government, and hope that that can be supported as well. And congratulations to the Public Works Board, current staff, former staff, current board, past board, and all the elected officials across the state. It's an extraordinary program.
So a birthday worth celebrating.
That's right.
Okay. Gary Rowe, give you the final word here.
I think that the board members that preceded us did a great job of telling the story about about the Public Works Board and the need for continued funding. We were fortunate to be able to get that funding restored in the current biennium, and I'm hoping that the legislators will see all the great things that are being done, the types of projects that are being funded, and they'll see the need to continue providing funding on into the future.
Okay. Gary Rowe, who is the vice chair of the Public Works Board, and as we mentioned, retired county government official, and then Kelly Snyder, current Public Works Director in Snohomish County. You've done a lot of things. UW, Assistant Vice Chancellor roles, other state government roles, or other county roles, plus the Public Works Board. You've done it all. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Good to talk to you, and thank you for watching Inside Olympia. We will see you again next week.